Every market turning point announces itself the same way, not with dramatic headlines or obvious signals, but with the quiet convergence of forces that most people miss until it's too late to matter. For silver, that convergence is happening right now, this weekend, in the next 72 hours. 3 separate dynamics, each powerful enough to move markets individually, are colliding simultaneously in a time frame so compressed that the outcome will determine silver's trajectory for the next decade. The first dynamic, physical inventory depletion approaching mathematical limits. The second dynamic, derivative contract expiration, representing unprecedented paper silver settlement obligations. The third dynamic, geopolitical pressure, creating supply chain disruptions that paper markets cannot price accurately. Any one of these forces could drive significant silver price movement. All 3 operating simultaneously within a 72-hour window creates conditions that historical precedent suggests typically resolve through violent price discovery rather than gradual adjustment. This isn't speculation about future possibilities. This is mathematical certainty about present realities that must resolve before Monday morning trading begins. And resolution of mathematical certainties doesn't wait for convenient timing or gradual implementation. Resolution occurs according to the timeline imposed by the underlying mathematics, regardless of market participants' preferences or preparation. The next 72 hours will determine whether silver continues trading as a speculative commodity or transitions into something fundamentally different, something that reflects its role as industrial necessity, monetary alternative, and strategic resource, rather than just another trading instrument. But to understand why these next 72 hours matter so much, we need to examine each converging force individually before seeing how their combination creates an outcome that none of them could produce alone. The first force reshaping silver markets this weekend, inventory depletion that has reached levels requiring immediate resolution rather than continued management. COMEX registered silver inventories have declined to approximately 47 million ounces. For context, normal registered inventory levels range between 150 to 200 million ounces. Current levels represent the lowest registered inventory in 15 years and the fastest rate of inventory decline in COMEX history. But the absolute numbers don't tell the complete story. The critical factor is the relationship between available inventory and pending delivery obligations, created by futures contracts approaching expiration. Friday, as options expiry alone represents approximately 85 million ounces of silver delivery obligations if current contracts are exercised rather than cash settled. That's nearly double the available registered inventory. When delivery obligations exceed available inventory by that margin, exchanges typically experience one of 2 outcomes: forced cash settlement of contracts that were supposed to deliver physical metal, or emergency measures to acquire additional inventory regardless of cost. COMEX has already indicated that cash settlement will be offered as an alternative to physical delivery for Friday's expiration. But cash settlement of futures contracts that industrial buyers intended to use for securing physical supply creates its own problems. Industrial buyers who needed actual silver for manufacturing operations cannot substitute cash payments for metal requirements. Electronics manufacturers, solar panel producers, automotive companies dependent on silver components for production scheduled in Q2 cannot simply accept cash instead of metal and hope alternative supply sources become available. This creates immediate demand pressure in physical markets from industrial buyers who must secure actual metal regardless of paper market pricing or availability. Meanwhile, the registered inventory that remains available becomes subject to competing demand from multiple sources. Industrial buyers seeking immediate supply, financial investors demanding physical delivery of futures contracts, and strategic buyers, recognizing that current inventory levels cannot support normal market operations. When multiple buyer categories compete for limited physical inventory, price discovery doesn't occur through gradual bidding processes. Price discovery occurs through rapid escalation until supply and demand achieve balance, or until available supply exhausts entirely. Given current inventory levels and pending obligations, both outcomes point toward significantly higher prices over the weekend period. But inventory dynamics represent only the first force converging this weekend. The second force involves derivative settlement obligations that dwarf normal market operations. Friday's silver options expiry represents the largest single derivative settlement in precious metals market history. Not just the largest silver derivative settlement, but the largest precious metals derivative settlement across all categories. Approximately $12 billion in silver options contracts expire Friday. These contracts, purchased when silver traded between $70 and $90 per ounce, now face expiration with silver above $120. The mathematical implications are straightforward. Options buyers who purchased contracts expecting silver to reach $100 now hold contracts with intrinsic value exceeding expectations by 20 to 30%. These contracts will almost certainly be exercised rather than abandoned. Exercise of options contracts creates automatic conversion into futures contracts requiring physical delivery or cash settlement. Given current physical inventory constraints, most exercise will result in cash settlement at prices reflecting current silver valuation rather than original contract strike prices. But cash settlement of that scale requires counterparties to have sufficient cash reserves to meet settlement obligations. And $12 billion in settlement obligations, concentrated into a single trading session, exceeds the normal cash management capabilities of many derivative market participants. When settlement obligations exceed available cash reserves, forced liquidation of other positions becomes necessary to meet margin calls and settlement requirements. Forced liquidation typically occurs without regard for optimal timing or price levels, creating artificial selling pressure that distorts normal market pricing. However, forced liquidation of non-silver positions to meet silver settlement obligations also creates buying pressure in silver markets as cash generated from other asset sales flows toward silver to cover derivative obligations. The net effect depends on whether buying pressure from settlement cash flows exceeds selling pressure from forced liquidation of silver positions by entities unable to meet settlement obligations. Given the scale of Friday's expiration and current market positioning, buying pressure appears likely to exceed selling pressure, creating upward price momentum during the settlement period. But settlement dynamics, however significant, would normally resolve over several days rather than forcing immediate resolution. The compressed timeline results from the third converging force, geopolitical developments that require immediate supply chain adjustments. Geopolitical pressure on silver supply chains has intensified dramatically over the past week. Iran's continued restrictions on silver exports, combined with shipping disruptions through Middle Eastern routes, have created physical supply constraints that paper markets have not yet incorporated into pricing models. Iranian silver refining capacity represents approximately 18% of global refined silver output. Export restrictions that began as temporary measures related to domestic political stability have now extended beyond initial timeframes and appear to reflect strategic rather than tactical considerations. When 18% of global supply becomes unavailable on short notice, normal market adjustment would occur gradually as buyers identify alternative sources and adjust consumption patterns accordingly. But gradual adjustment requires time. And time is exactly what current market dynamics don't provide. Industrial buyers facing Q2 production schedules cannot delay silver procurement while waiting for Iranian export restrictions to resolve or alternative supply sources to develop. Manufacturing operations scheduled for April and May require silver inputs secured during March procurement cycles. This creates immediate physical demand that must be satisfied through currently available inventory rather than future production that may or may not materialize according to projected timelines. Meanwhile, shipping disruptions through Middle Eastern routes affect not just Iranian silver, but silver refined in other regional facilities that depend on Iranian feedstock or transportation infrastructure. UAE silver refining operations, which process approximately 8% of global silver supply, have reported delays and complications related to regional transportation networks. These disruptions affect delivery schedules for silver already purchased and contracted for delivery during March and April. When existing contracts face delivery delays, buyers typically secure alternative supply to maintain production schedules, while delayed shipments work through transportation problems. This creates duplicate demand as buyers secure replacement metal while still expecting eventual delivery of originally contracted supply. Duplicate demand, combined with reduced available supply due to export restrictions and transportation delays, creates mathematical imbalance that must resolve through higher prices, reduced consumption, or supply allocation based on buyer priorities rather than market mechanisms. None of these resolution mechanisms can be implemented gradually over extended time periods. They must be implemented immediately to address Q2 production requirements and pending delivery obligations. This suggests that industrial demand destruction will not occur during the weekend period either, leaving price adjustment as the primary mechanism for achieving new equilibrium. Price adjustment under these conditions typically continues until one of three outcomes occurs. Supply increases sufficiently to meet demand. Demand decreases sufficiently to match supply, or prices reach levels where financial speculation becomes the primary market driver, rather than industrial fundamentals. Given the constraints on supply increases and demand decreases within relevant timeframes, price adjustment may continue until financial speculation takes control of silver market dynamics. And financial speculation in silver markets, once activated by supply crisis conditions, historically drives prices far above levels that industrial fundamentals would justify. The 1979-1980 silver crisis provides relevant precedent. Industrial silver demand remained relatively constant, while financial speculation drove prices from $11 to $49 per ounce within 18 months. Current conditions suggest similar dynamics could develop over much shorter timeframes if financial speculation becomes activated by apparent physical supply. Scarcity demonstrated through this weekend's convergence. But 1979 to 1980, financial speculation developed gradually over many months. Current derivative settlement obligations and compressed timeline could activate financial speculation immediately rather than gradually, creating price movements over days rather than months. The mathematical possibility exists for silver to double or triple current levels within the 72-hour window if derivative settlement creates liquidity crisis that attracts speculative capital looking for rapid profit opportunities. Whether such extreme price movements actually occur depends on factors beyond current analysis: regulatory intervention, emergency inventory measures, forced cash settlement terms, and speculative capital availability. But the mathematical foundation for extreme price movements has been established through the convergence of inventory depletion, derivative settlement obligations, and supply chain disruptions within a compressed timeline. This weekend will determine whether that mathematical foundation translates into actual price movements or whether alternative resolution mechanisms prevent crisis-level outcomes. For market participants, the strategic question becomes whether to position for extreme outcomes or normal resolution, recognizing that positioning for normal resolution while extreme outcomes develop typically proves more costly than positioning for extreme outcomes while normal resolution occurs. Historical precedent suggests positioning for extreme outcomes represents superior risk-adjusted strategy when mathematical foundations for such outcomes have been established through multiple converging forces. The mathematical foundations are now in place, the timeline is established, the resolution mechanisms are constrained. What happens next depends on how silver markets respond when mathematical necessity meets financial engineering under time pressure that prevents gradual adjustment. The next 72 hours will provide the answer. But the answer, once provided, will determine silver market dynamics for months or years, rather than just resolving immediate weekend pressures. Because financial markets remember how previous crises resolved. And crisis resolution that favors physical markets over paper markets tends to establish precedents that influence future crisis resolution. If physical silver markets assert dominance over paper silver markets this weekend, that dominance pattern will likely persist during future stress periods, creating permanent structural changes rather than temporary price adjustments. And permanent structural changes in precious metals markets typically correspond with permanent structural changes in monetary systems and international financial architecture. This is why these 72 hours matter beyond immediate silver price movements. They represent a potential inflection point where precious metals markets either remain subordinated to paper market control or break free into independent pricing mechanisms based on physical reality rather than financial engineering. The outcome will be determined not by analysis or prediction, but by mathematical forces that have already been set in motion and must resolve according to physical constraints rather than theoretical models. Don't blink. Because when mathematical necessity meets financial engineering under time pressure, resolution occurs faster than most people can recognize what's happening. And recognition typically occurs only after positioning opportunity has passed. The 72-hour countdown has begun, the mathematics are in motion, the outcome will be determined by Sunday midnight, and Monday morning will reveal whether silver continues trading as a commodity or begins functioning as something fundamentally different, something that reflects its actual role in industrial civilization and monetary systems, rather than its paper market representation. The trend rewrite is coming. Whether it rewrites toward higher prices or normalized levels depends on resolution of forces already converging. But resolution will occur this weekend, and weekend resolution will determine decade-long trajectory. Don't blink, because 72 hours is all the time mathematics provides. And mathematics doesn't extend deadlines for market convenience. The moment of truth arrives Sunday midnight. The trend rewrite begins Monday morning. Whether you're positioned for what's coming depends on whether you understood what was coming before it arrived. The countdown continues, the forces converge, the outcome approaches. 72 hours and counting.